I'm Effy and this is What Effy Reads.
I was lost but you helped me find my way, tainted by a desire, cause I was scared to face the truth. You pulled me out from my anxiety.
Today I'm going to be talking about all of the books that I DNFed in 2021. I will say that there's not much tea to this video. There are a few books that I've got a little bit of tea about, but most of them I just kind of wasn't feeling in that moment and I just ended up DNFing. I am actually pretty proud of myself for the amount of books that I did DNF last year. There are a few books I read that I probably wished that I'd DNF'd, but in general I think I've been quite good at DNFing books that just weren't working for me and not forcing myself to push through with them. It is kind of an ongoing goal that I do continue to try and DNF because I think it's often an act of self-care to DNF when you're not loving a book. So I guess we will just run through all of the books that I DNF'd and I will briefly tell you why I chose not to continue with them. First up, we've got A Master of Gin by P. Jelly Clark. This was one of those that I just wasn't feeling at that point in time. I think part of it is apparently there's prequels or novellas or something that you need to read before the story to be able to get into it. But I hadn't read them. I think it is a book that I plan on returning to in the future. It just wasn't working for me at that point in time. Next up, we've got Adjustment Day by Chuck Palahniuk. This was a book that I think I picked up during my Dice Controls My Reading for a Week vlog, and it was fine. I think Chuck Palahniuk's one of those authors that you have to be in the headspace for because his work is so weird. So it just wasn't quite connecting with me. I do plan on returning to it. I've read most of Chuck Palahniuk's back catalogue, so it's one of very few that I haven't read. But again, I just wasn't feeling it. The next book we've got is American War by Omar El Akkad. This book I think was trying to say something important, but it seemed like it was trying to draw parallels to the American Civil War. But I know virtually nothing about that, so it wasn't doing anything for me. It could also be that this is one of the rare books that just doesn't work in audiobook format for me. I think potentially I would be looking to pick it up again, but I'm also not going to go out of my way to pick it up. The next book we've got is Book of Joan by Lydia Junckernich, I think. Again, this is one that I had lots of books on the go and I was enjoying it well enough, but I wasn't loving it and I wasn't reaching for it to pick it up as a priority, so I just put it to the side as a temporary DNF. I may pick it up in the future, but also I have a really strong feeling that I've put in my unhaul pile. The next book that I've got on my list, I'm actually really mad that I DNF'd it. I think it's because it was long and it kind of fell to the wayside, but it was a book that I was enjoying. And that is Goddess of Limbo by Leah Falls. From what I can tell, it's centered around a around these ancient gods that one of them ended up splintering to stop another god doing something, or out of madness that another god did it, and then that had like lasting ramifications. It seems like it's going to be an epic fantasy with lots of politicking. But unfortunately I was only able to read like tiny bits here and there, so I wasn't making much progress. But it is meant to be queer and like a massive spanning story, so I am excited to read more. I just need time to focus on it. I've also got Going Postal on this list by Terry Pratchett. This was a book that ended up DNFing because I just kind of got my dates mixed up. It was meant to be part of a read along, but I got my dates confused and ended up reading it at completely the wrong time. And by the time that I was making any progress, the read along was finished. And then the Goodreads Choice Award nominees were announced, so I just ended up having to put this book to one side. The next book is Grotesque by Natsuo Kurona. It's marked on Storygraph as being slow paced, but I don't even know if slow paced does it justice. It moves at the speed of a snail. At the point that I ended up DNFing it, nothing was happening in the story. It was just this really long diatribe about sexual harassment, which obviously is something that needs to be discussed. But I went into this book thinking it was going to be some kind of thriller, and it was just so slow. Nothing was happening. Again, I think it's a little bit like Goddess of Limbo, where I need to be able to give myself time to fully dedicate to it, and that's just not something I had. The next book on the list is It by Stephen King. No real tea with this, just kind of stopped reading it, stopped picking it up. Next up, we've got Junk by Melvin Burgess. I did have some trouble getting into it, and then I realised that it's by the same author as The Lost Witch, which kind of put me off reading it. I probably will end up picking it up at some point in the future, but it's not one that I'm necessarily going to prioritise. The next book I've got is Just Ignore Him by Alan Davis. This is a book that I was so interested to read, but the problem is I don't do well with books that are written as short essays, and that's exactly what this book is. I do think it has a lot to tell, and I think it's going to be quite hard hitting. It was already very hard hitting from what I did read, but it is one that I'm probably going to have to just push through because the style isn't something that I enjoy. We've got Love in the Big City, which I can't remember the author of, but the image will be on screen. I just stopped picking it up. That's the thing, like a soft DNF for me is like super soft. Often it's just like, oh, just not picking it up anymore. The next book we've got is No Exit by Taylor Adams. I know this book is very well loved, but it's one of the few on this list that is 100% a hard DNF. I was looking on Storygraph to see what I'd written about all of these DNFs, and against this one I've just wrote so bad. What I did read of it felt like it was trying too hard to make you think that the bad guy wasn't the bad guy, like you meant to like the guy that was the bad guy after all, and I just didn't want to read it. It just wasn't enjoyable. I did end up going and like reading the end as well, and it didn't make me want to read the bits in the middle, so I'm no interest in reading it. I may pick up Hairpin Bridge, but unsure. Potentially not. The next book we've got is Of Women and Salt by Gabriella Garcia. This was one of the books I picked up for the Goodreads Choice Awards. I got... How far through did I get? I got a quarter of the way through, and I think I found it just really disjointed. Every chapter seemed to be from a different perspective, which I think is going to be one of those where the perspectives layer up and you eventually get the story. But it was very jarring to me that you jump from one to the other with not much connecting. The only reason you knew they were connected is that there's this really simple family tree at the start of the book that says they're all connected, but otherwise there's nothing that joins the stories together. Weirdly enough, what I hated in that book, I didn't hate in Build Your House Around My Body. Weird. But I think that also comes down to the skill of the writing, because each little vignette almost, I was engaged in what was happening, even though I didn't necessarily know how it contributed to the overall picture. The next two books have very similar names. In fact, when you're saying them, they sound the same. We've got Straight On Till Morning by Cj Sutton and Straight On Till Morning by Liz Braswell. Both of them I was reading for a Peter Pan vlog, and I think I just decided that I'd had enough of Peter Pan stories. I did find that the Liz Braswell story was a lot denser than I expected. I thought it was going to be quite short. I saw that it was Disney, and having not picked up any of the Twisted Tales, I thought it was going to be a lot briefer and a lot less invested. I don't know. I wasn't expecting the chunky book that it was. And the KJ Sutton book, I don't think it was particularly bad. I just had had enough of Peter Pan stories by that point. Next up, we've got Sweet Pea by Cj Scooce. This was a book that I was really enjoying when I was reading. I just ended up putting it down and never picking it up again. The Glass Hotel by Emily St. Mandel was because my library loan ran out. Simple as that. Same for The Keeper of Lost Things by Ruth Hogan, I believe. The Once and Future Witches by Alex E. Harrow. I enjoyed what I read of it, but then I injured my hand and I only had it in physical form, so I couldn't continue reading it. And by the time my hand was feeling better, I'd moved on. I will definitely be returning to it in the future. The Pillars of the Earth by Ken Follett. I enjoyed what I was reading of it. I think I was quite intimidated because it's very chunky, but I was very, very much enjoying it. I just put it down and never picked it up again. The Revelations by Eric Hall. I don't think I got far enough in to really think about it. Again, put it down, never picked it up again. You can see a pattern with these. The next one though, I do have tea. It's very weak tea, but it's tea. It's The Spanish Love Deception by Elena Amass. I will die mad that won the debut novel category of the 2021 Goodreads Choice Awards, because I considered it an act of self-care to DNF that book. I had such a horrible time with it. I think I DNF'd it at like page 150, so I made a fair chunk of the way through the book, but I absolutely hated the love interest. You're meant to think that he's besotted with the protag, but he's so mean to her, and so unnecessarily mean. And then the protag's like so self-involved, and also she's absolutely obsessed with the love interest's eyes. It was way too much. It was absolutely horrible. And then So I did look at some reviews to try and encourage me to keep reading it. And they had the opposite effect, which is fine because it just means that it stayed as a DNF. But the general consensus was that the couple don't even get together until page 400, which is way too far into a romance book. And then when they do get together, it goes from 0 to 100 in like 2 seconds, which again is not very fun. Like, I like a slow burn, but like a slow burn has to be like slowly building up to things, not we're going to be mean to each other until we smash genitals. Like, it doesn't make sense to me to be like that. It's no secret that romance isn't my genre. I do enjoy smart, but a book that is pure romance is very rarely going to be a hit with me. It has to have a little bit more to it, and whether that's the time travel element or the time loop element that you have with One Last Stop, whether that's an epic fantasy that surrounds the love story, or I guess whether that's it being as filthy as anything. But a straight up contemporary romance isn't likely to do it for me. But at least make the characters not be just nasty to each other, especially when it seems like they like one another. I do not get the appeal of the book, and I think there were so many excellent books in the category. Like, I get why it won, it was the most popular, but you know, it beat out the love songs of W.E.B. Du Bois, it beat out D-Transition Baby, it beat out the final revival of Opal and Nev, it beat out Firekeeper's Daughter. So many exceptional books in that category, and that's completely ignoring the fact that there were loads of debut novels that didn't even make it. You've got Iron Widow, you've got Build Your House Around My Body. I've probably got other debuts behind me that I absolutely loved. It made me so mad. And I get people like it. I don't understand why people like it. Please do tell me why you do like it. But it wasn't for me. Next book is The Unbroken by C.L. Clarke. I got about 8 pages in, decided it was too much soldiery stuff, so wanted to put it down. I very likely will pick it up again because it was in a book box, so I want to at least give it a fair shot before unhauling it. But also, 8 pages in is not far enough to decide it's not for you. The next book is Through Her Eyes by Sophie Faye. I think this book is a little bit unpolished, but what I was reading of it, I was enjoying, so likely I will pick it up again. To Sleep in a Sea of Stars by Christopher Palahniuk. Simply put, my library loan ran out. Unburied by various authors. This is an anthology of queer stories. I enjoyed what I read, but when it comes to reading short stories, I like to read them in a single sitting, and I just didn't have enough time to read them in those single sittings. So I ended up having to put it to one side. Vampire Blood Trilogy by Darren Shan. I'm doing this thing where I am rereading the Darren Shan saga and annotating it, and I didn't have the time to dedicate to actually reading and annotating the other 2 books. So I completed the whole of Cirque du Freak. And then I needed to move on to The Vampire's Assistant, I think it's the second one. And then, you know, for my favourite series, I can't remember the names of the books. But basically, I read the whole of book 1 and still had to read book 2 and 3 and just didn't have enough time to dedicate to sitting down and annotating it. I do plan on continuing, but because they're bound up in a single novel, technically it counts as a DNF. Watching You by Arnie Dahl. I have no patience for following book where you're following a corrupt cop. Next, Water Memory by Daniel Pine, I think. It was one of those where I started and then just didn't pick up again. What Doesn't Kill You Makes You Blacker. I can't remember the name of the author. I initially soft DNF'd it because it's a series of essays and they weren't terribly engaging. They weren't the worst. And then I subsequently heard that the author made some really problematic comments later in the book, and I was like, yeah, this is a hard DNF. I'm never picking this up again. This is an interesting one. We've got Within These Wicked Walls by Laura Blackwood. If you've seen my best and most surprising books of the year video, you'll see that this book actually made that list. But initially I tried reading it in April and I just couldn't get into it. So I ended up DNFing it, but obviously that was a soft DNF because I subsequently read it in October and ended up loving it. And the last two entries we've got on the list are A Broken Blade by Melissa Blair and The Thursday Murder Club by Richard Osman. And these are on my DNF list purely out of a technicality in that I ran out of time in 2021. I'm actually still currently reading them, so whilst they sort of count as a DNF because I literally did not finish them in 2021, I have not put them to one side. I do plan on continuing to read them. A Broken Blade I own, so I will keep chipping away at that, and it doesn't really matter. Whereas Thursday Murder Club, it's a library loan, which expires at the end of this month. So it may be a case of I may run out of time and have to pick it up in the future. Oh, I've missed one. My apologies. There's one more. It's On Tyranny, the graphic novel version. I cannot remember the author. And this is one that I've also got tea for. I just about yeeted this book across the room. I would have if I'd had the physical copy, but I was reading it on my phone and I'm not yeeting my phone across the room. So I was already not particularly engaged in it. Seemed to be lecturing. And then it went and told you that, like, to be a better person, you should read or reread the works of J.K. Rowling. And I was like, you do realise those books are full of dog whistles. They are not a good recommendation. This book is 100% not worth my time and clearly is not practicing what it's preaching. But that is the complete list of every single DNF from 2021. I think there's about 40 books on this list. I can't actually remember, which sounds like a lot, but then I did read 324 books last year. Please give this video a like. Comment down below if there's any of these books you think I should prioritise picking up again. Any of them that you had particularly strong feelings about. And until tomorrow, bye!
There's a place